the future of wellbeing in the workplace. I'm really excited to explore how the pandemic has changed the future of business. I don't know about everyone, but it really felt to me that work was kind of really rigid before, and it kind of felt that work really meant commuting to an office and working 9 till 5 and commuting back. Whereas we've been very lucky and fortunate enough to have been able to work from home for almost a year now. And we've got to be mindful that people haven't had that luxury of being able to work throughout the pandemic. A lot of companies are having to adopt a hybrid approach of working, which will bring both office working and home working. And I just really want to use this session to delve a bit deeper into what this means for the well-being of our workforce. I'm joined today by my panel of different team members within Webgains. I really want to have an open and honest discussion about well-being and mental health and how we can ensure that this is maintained while restrictions continue to be eased and the world of work changes when the pandemic hopefully comes to an end very soon. So I'll introduce the panel. So we've got Hannah, who has been here for about 4 months. She came over from a publishing background to be a senior account manager here, and she's based in the Manchester office. We've also got Sid, who's been here for about 18 months. She works in the publishing team and she's based in Bristol. Chloe is here. She's been here for about 2 years and she is an account director here at Webgains. She is based in the London office. And then we've got Georgia, who is very new to Webgains as well. She's been here for about 4 months and again is in the account management team as an account executive. And a little bit about me. I'm a HR generalist here at Webgains. I also started completely remotely. I found it quite a daunting prospect to think about starting in a different industry, something I'm completely new to, and starting completely remotely without meeting anyone. Georgia, I know that you also were very new to the industry and you also started completely remotely. What challenges did you face, do you think, being a new starter and starting in this pandemic, starting remotely?
I think it's really, I think it can all be summed up by the lack of sort of face-to-face contact with your team. Obviously, on your first day of work, wherever you go in a normal situation, you'd go in, you'd meet the team, you'd sort of have that like face-to-face contact that you're really missing when you start at home. And I think as it goes through the training process, you know, often, especially in a new role, in a new industry that you've never sort of been in before, you'd have maybe a lot of shadowing, a lot of like seeing what the other team members do and how the day-to-day tasks sort of come about. But I think working from home and doing it that way, it's a lot less of a fluid experience. You sort of have, it's a bit disjointed, it's a bit jolty, it's sort of, yeah, it's not the fluid, this is the next step sort of learning experience. It's more sort of compartmentalized, which is it's not sort of impossible to do, of course, but yeah, it definitely makes it a lot less fluid, and it sort of becomes sometimes slightly off-putting to ask the smaller picture questions if you've just got a tiny admin question or a little query that hasn't quite been covered. It's sort of going through that process of, you know, you have to message someone and then you have to wait for their response and then potentially book in a meeting for it. Yeah, it's sort of a little bit off-putting to sort of ask those smaller questions. So I think that was definitely a challenge that I faced when I started. Yeah,
thank you. And Hannah, I know that you've sort of met a few people in your team. How did you have anything different to say about that? How did you find it? Did you have challenges starting remotely?
I guess I had a very different experience because I already had a relationship with Webgains, publisher side. I also knew a couple of guys from the industry in general. So for me, it was, I kind of came in knowing what to expect and then find out what I expected wasn't quite right. I've had an account manager in the past at another network when I was brand facing. I definitely didn't realize how much of the platform aspect went into account management. So again, I echo what Georgia said. We could have just gone to someone's desk and said, can you quickly show me this in 5 minutes how to do this? We had to book in a meeting or check people's team status to see if they were available. And even when they were available, they might not be available. So you had to do things on multiple times. It was definitely something I had to do a couple of processes more than once. I'll probably still ask a few questions along the line. But yeah, for me, definitely echo that experience that I miss just being able to go to someone's desk and saying, have you got 2 minutes to show me this one little thing? Actually, sometimes that one little thing can be when you're next free, 24 hours, I'm free. So then it puts your day on hold, and you have to learn to work around that and be quite flexible.
Okay. And I think it would be really interesting to hear from a manager's perspective how what measures you put in place to ensure that the smooth transition for new starters. So Sid and Chloe, I know you both had new starters that started in the pandemic. Chloe, what measures did you put in place to ensure that the new starters did have a smooth transition?
Yep. So from our end, we always make sure that their training is set up for the first 2 weeks. So they're well aware of where they're going, who they're talking to, and that time is already set aside. So you're not running into those issues of this person doesn't have the availability at that particular time. I also continue to set up weekly meetings with the new starters that have kind of extended beyond just the normal 3 months that you might have a weekly meeting, to make sure that they're comfortable and they can ask me any questions that they want to during that time. Something that I know was brought up here by Georgia and Hannah a little bit is the fact that it's not as easy to ask questions. So I like to have that dedicated time for anyone who reports into me to come to me and ask those. I have found that sometimes people come to me a little bit more frequently than they would in an office, which has definitely made it a little bit difficult. So kind of redirecting those as well and making sure that they're comfortable with the wider team and not just me, so they could ask anybody within, say, the internationals team instead of coming to me directly as well.
Okay. And Sid, did you kind of have the same experience with that?
Yeah, so another thing we found really useful is we kind of, alongside the weekly catch-ups, we set aside a 15-minute call every single day just to stand up. And it meant that everyone knew for that 15 minutes, if you had any queries, if you had any kind of questions, anything you wanted to go over, we had that time every single day where the whole team would get together, and kind of no question was small enough, like it didn't matter what you wanted to ask, we had that time available, which we found really, really useful.
Yeah, I think a lot of it for me was making sure that you did have enough time to learn the processes that maybe you would have learned quicker if you had that face-to-face interaction. I know that what we did at Webgains is we sent an email around just reminding people and encouraging people to turn their cameras on, just to have that more face-to-face interaction. Georgia, is that something from a new starter perspective that would have helped you have a smoother process, do you think?
Yeah, I think definitely, and I can't fault my team for it, because people have their cameras on quite regularly, and it is that nice. It's not just about how people sort of reinforce you verbally, but it's also like seeing people's facial expressions, when you're talking, and it just puts sort of a face to a name so much easier. And like Chloe said, it makes you sort of feel able to ask not just your manager but the whole team any questions you might have. So yeah, I think cameras on is definitely, although it can be quite intimidating to start with, the thought of putting your own camera on, but yeah, I think it definitely puts a face to a name, and it sort of gets you used to what you're going to see when we are back in the office, because you can't hide behind a screen, obviously, when you're all together. So yeah, definitely.
Okay. And I think a sort of really key theme in this is, although we have been working from home, and I think at the start it was very exciting and a prospect that quite a lot of people hadn't done before. It was very, like I said, it did feel quite rigid. And your office was your office, and that was where you worked. How do you ensure a work-life balance when you're working from home, Hannah? What measures do you put in place? Because I think it's quite easy to merge the two. So what do you do to ensure that you are still having a work-life balance, even though you're working from your house?
I'll be honest, I haven't cracked that one yet. I think when April 12th strikes, that will change. I actually caught up with another client about this today, saying we're definitely working outside of contracted hours, because it's like we'll keep on top of work while there's nowhere else to go and nothing else to do. But sadly, everyone has that same attitude. So our emails used to start to die off 5:30. Mine still go pretty strong till 7, 8 o'clock at night. And I'm guessing, Chloe, you have similar experience just with time zones anyway. I think once April 12th comes back into play, we'll start to have that life balance back in. Because right now it's very easy to go, I'll just finish this task, I'll just finish my tea's cooking, I've got 20 minutes to just do a few more emails. So when I work that one out, I'll definitely get back to you. It's something I've not cracked yet, but it's something I encourage my team to say, if you want to take an hour lunch while it's sunny, just work around your emails, on your calls, be flexible. Don't feel like you need to come to me for approval to do things. if an hour walk in the sunshine makes you feel better for the rest of the day, then that's just not even a question for me. So the work-life balance thing is a bit of a weird one. Webgains has been very good in being flexible and sharing that message, especially in the winter. If you want to go for a walk in the daylight and take an hour and a half lunch and just work later on in the evening, if that works for you, great. So for the work-life balance, I guess just doing what makes me happiest in a situation that's probably making quite a few people unhappy and unsure. That's my approach to it. I haven't cracked the whole finishing at set times. Every day is different. Some days I might have a quieter day. I'll never finish early because there's always something to do. But there's some days it's very easy to work on until 6, 7 o'clock at night. And I know it's not just an experience in Webgains. I've spoken to my colleagues in the industry outside of the Webgains who are going through the same thing.
Okay. Well, that was really interesting to hear how you're finding it, because there are a few little changes that I've done myself that really helped me. So, for example, just trying to work from one room and not taking my laptop into my living room or my bedroom or anywhere else, just trying to, I know that not everyone has the luxury of being able to work just from a different place where they relax maybe. But Chloe, what kind of encouragement do you have for your team to ensure that they have work-life balance?
Yeah, so from my end, actually, the work-life balance has always been really high priority, both for myself and for my team. So I do work set hours. I either start early and finish early, or I'll start later and finish later if I'm dealing with US stuff. And I will always take my hour lunch break, and I encourage my team to do the same. So a lot of this is just regarding the communication on those aspects. So when we do have our catch-ups during the week, it's making sure they're not feeling overloaded. If I notice that someone's starting earlier, or if I notice that somebody's working later, it's about having those conversations and figuring out why. If it's because, similar to what Hannah said, they don't have anything else to do and they want to be doing this, fine. I'm not going to stand in the way of that. But if it's because they're overloaded, or if a client is being really difficult and they're being forced to work outside of their set hours, that's when I have to step in and intervene, because even if it is a global pandemic at the moment, that doesn't mean that people aren't allowed to have a work-life balance. And I think that I should be the person to make sure that they have the ability to do that during a time that's already difficult for a lot of people.
Okay. I think that's really interesting to say that, a massive focus on you and your team has been the work-life balance. Do you feel like companies have become more human since the pandemic? We are having these conversations about well-being and checking up on your team's mental health. And do you think that we've become more human, Chloe?
I think Webgains definitely has been. They've been so supportive during all of this. They've brought in the in-house therapist for anyone who feels that would be beneficial. They have yoga weekly. But I think that we are especially lucky here at Webgains to have that. I do think that there are cases of other companies taking advantage of the situation and the fact that people have jobs to exploit them maybe a little bit more than they should be. But I'm very proud of how Webgains has handled everything.
And Sid, do you kind of feel the same as that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think kind of what we were touching on earlier with that work-life balance and kind of working hours during this pandemic and working from home, it is so difficult. It's something I really struggled with at the start of lockdown as well. And I know that within our team, we've spent a lot of time trying to make sure that work-life balance is good. And we kind of share techniques that work well for us. So kind of, for example, putting away your laptop and like physically putting it somewhere else. So I put mine in a cupboard, and when that cupboard door closes, it's the end of the work day. We also do like an alarm at 5:25 that basically says like, you've got 5 minutes left, start winding down, and then another one at 5:30, which is you hear that ping and it's the end of the work day. You put stuff away. And we also, particularly with new starters who've joined during this pandemic, if we're noticing, they've worked late a couple of times, like it happens with everyone, it's when it becomes habitual that it's an issue. And exactly like Chloe was saying, checking in on workload, but also just checking in a little bit more casually sometimes too towards the end of the day, seeing how they're getting on and encouraging people that if it's not urgent, you can shelve it and you can pick it back up the next day. There's always going to be another thing to do. You're never going to complete that to-do list. So just accepting that and knowing that you can come to it tomorrow, I think, is a big thing.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. So as we go into more of a hybrid approach, and we will be continuing to recruit new staff, and for the next few months probably we will be asking people to still start remotely until offices reopen. Georgia, what piece of advice would you give to a manager recruiting new staff, just to ensure that they do feel connected during this time?
I think, as sort of Sid touched upon just then, I think the casual conversation element of sort of the workplace is really important. It's something that's obviously lacking when you're not sat side by side with someone. When you're in an office, you sort of take 1-2 minutes just to say, oh, how was your weekend, things like that. But when you're working from home, obviously that can often lack. And I think sort of a big bit of advice I'd give is just, to make sure that, maybe even new starters take time to schedule in a call with anyone from the team, anyone at all, just to have that non-work related conversation. I think it can make the company again feel so much more human. It can make you feel like you can cross that barrier into being not just colleagues but friends as well. And I think it's the big thing that's missing from the day-to-day life, and especially because at Webgains there have been so many new starters in the last year, so many people starting from home. I think any situation where you can get those new starters together. I know when I started back in December, there were a few calls scheduled in with a lot of the new starters in sort of groups where we could get to know each other a bit better, and it just makes you feel a lot less like you're on your own in this. So I think, if management get the chance to be able to make sure that not only is the new starter connecting with them as a manager, but with their colleagues, with everyone else that's new and everyone in their team, I think, the focus on sort of that little bit of casual conversation can be really important.
Yeah, I think that's definitely what people miss the most about working in an office, is just being able to bounce ideas off each other a lot more easier than maybe you can do off of Teams. Chloe, what challenges do you think that managers will face when offices reopen? So obviously we're going to have employees that are maybe scared to go back to work. Work is often a place where you should feel safe to go back to. What challenges do you think that you might face?
Well, I do think we'll have some people who are hesitant to go back into the office, and I do think we need to respect that. If someone doesn't want to go back in until they're vaccinated or the rest of the office is vaccinated, I think that's a perfectly valid point. But realistically, I think the biggest thing we're going to run into is we're going to have people taking like 2-hour lunches because they'll be catching up on a year's worth of various bits and just being able to see each other in person. And I think people will be a little bit overstimulated from that for a little while. But I also don't think it's a bad thing, because obviously during those like lunches, or if you're having slightly longer meetings or catch ups in the kitchen, anything like that, that's where some of the best ideas come from. And I do think that we're actually going to see an increase in productivity instead of a decrease, because we'll have more of that ability to connect in person and face to face.
Okay, yeah, it's definitely all about centered around communication and connectivity, isn't it, again? So my final question, really, Sid, what piece of advice would you give to a new manager managing a team during this time?
So this is quite an interesting one, because I've only managed someone during a lockdown. This has been my first experience of it. So I think while it's been a very difficult situation to kind of develop this skill set, it has been incredibly useful to show how important it is to develop a kind of team attitude and to grow as a team. You can set aside kind of training calls and get everyone up to speed on processes, but you need to have that team element together and that community, even especially during lockdown when we're all kind of stuck in our homes. You need to feel that you are part of a community. So having those check-ins, having those casual chats, even though we're all working remotely, having those team calls are so important, and they're such an important part of managing.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much to the panel for some really great insights there. And thank you to everyone watching. I really hope you enjoy the rest of Accelerate 2021.